Hello, and welcome. It's evening here in England in year 2013, but wherever you might be and whatever period in time, I hope you're having a good day. I thought I would give you an explanation or have a discussion, a bit of a boozy discussion, in fact. Let's grab Strongbow. On World War II and the causes. Okay. From my perspective anyway, and give it a slightly different slant on the way it's taught in the history books. Okay. The troubles started around the Wall Street crash of 1929. There are many who say that Germany had grievances from World War I, and they were bitter and wanted to get back territory they'd lost at the Treaty of Versailles, but I'm not so sure of that. The Weimar government, which was the democratic government after the war, didn't really, as far as I'm aware, make any demands for these territories back. For example, the Polish corridor, Sudetenland, Rhineland, etc. In the 20s, there was a boom in Germany, an economic boom, that was fueled by borrowed money from America. And the Germans were quite happy to live the high life. And then they were not concerned in the slightest in recovering territory. The problem happened in the World Depression of around the 1930s, which hit Germany particularly hard, but it hit other nations hard as well, and in various ways. And unemployment in Germany shot up to many millions. So who were the major players? So Hitler is elected to power, and he goes from being a relative unknown. He is an extremist who is intent on well, no one's quite sure what he's intent on. But one of the things about Hitler was he was, although a cynical politician, in his heart he was sincere. He had a set of beliefs, extreme beliefs, which ordinarily would outline him to the political wilderness, just as someone such as Lenin and the Bolsheviks ordinarily spent most of their life in complete obscurity. It was only when very exceptional circumstances came along that they got their chance and were able to put in their extreme policies. Now, think about the Western politicians who were called the appeasers, and even Stalin, who by that time was not really extreme in foreign policy, at least he was very conventional. They were used to being politicians. As politicians are, they kind of are often blow with the wind and do what's ever pragmatic. Adolf Hitler was not like that. He was sincere, and he put into practice as best as he could the ideas he dreamt up in Mein Kampf, which essentially was to exterminate the Jews and take over Eastern Europe and to make the Slavs either exterminate them or enslave them, and to become the conqueror of Europe. And this was his plan. But the other politicians could not see this. The appeasers, they thought he would compromise and so on. They could control him. You wouldn't be so serious as to put such an insane idea into practice. And so this was the mistake they made. So we're in 1933, and Germany has just come to power. Now, the other thing to be aware of is the Soviet Union. In the early 30s, about 1932, Stalin, who was a psychopath, deliberately murdered millions of his own people in forced collectivizations, particularly in places the Ukraine and the foreign countries he had appropriated to the Soviet Union. As a deliberate policy, he starved these people or imprisoned or removed them to labor camps, often in order to change the balance of the population, to put Russians into these ethnic areas to keep Russia as the big power in the Soviet Union. So it was probably known that this genocide was taking place. Western intelligence reports could not have been that stupid, and so the West knew they had one psychopath on their hands, the Soviet Union, and they also knew that the Soviet Union's military was increasing rapidly, and that it would take over within a matter of years both Britain and France and Germany. And in fact, that's what happened. In 1945, the Soviet Union, the Soviet army was far greater than the American and the Western. It was only with the invention of nuclear weapons that the Soviets were kept out of Western Europe. I mean, they took over Eastern Europe. So the West is afraid of Stalin, who is a communist, and it also knows that Germany is on the brink of economic collapse. And if Germany collapses, Eastern Europe will collapse, because the East European economy is dependent on the German, just as Germany today is a powerhouse of Europe. And trade, Western trade, would also suffer greatly. So the West is desperate to keep Germany propped up, and if possible keep it strong. And so Hitler comes to power, and he is an avowed anti-communist, and he builds up an army. And so the West, but also he is odious man who starts implementing policies against the Jews, and also imprisoning people in concentration camps in Dachau. I mean, it wasn't like the horrors that were to follow, but he was clearly pretty evil, a nasty, horrible regime. And the West knew this, and particularly Churchill, warned against Hitler. But what could they do? They were kind of between the devil and the deep blue sea. They're trying to keep Germany strong, Hitler, but not too strong, so he'll be a buffer against the Soviet Union, because the Democrats had collapsed and the Nazis were now in power. The other problem, the appeasers, which was what Britain and France were called, was Hitler's demands through the 30s were reasonable. He had a point. A lot of German territories, which is what he was asking for, had been taken away in the Treaty of Versailles when Germany lost World War I. Parts of Polish corridor, Silesia, Rhineland, and even places like Austria and Sudetenland, which weren't part of Germany but were German speaking. And to a certain extent, the German minorities there were treated as second-class citizens by the East Europeans. They certainly weren't enslaved, though, as the Nazis were to do to them. So Hitler had the kind of moral right. It was very difficult for the appeasers to stop Hitler taking over these countries, particularly when the Germans in them seemed to want to unite with Germany. But of course, every time one of these countries united with Germany, for example, Austria and Anschluss, Germany becomes more and more powerful, and it's becoming too powerful now. Then the Germans and the Soviets do a masterstroke, and they form a non-aggression pact, which totally throws Britain and France. They did not expect that the Nazis and the Soviets would become allies, and they became allies in an incredibly cynical way in order to partition Poland. We always think that it was only Germany who invaded Poland in 1939, but that's not true. The Russians invaded East Poland as well, but Britain and France only declared war on Germany, which was incredibly embarrassing thing. But you know, I don't think Britain could be expected to fight Germany and Soviet Union at the same time. So yeah, so the whole British and French policy was that to assume that the Nazis would kind of maybe invade Soviet Union, and sort of the two of them would weaken each other, and perhaps some kind of solution would come out of this. But it didn't quite work that way. The Nazis very cleverly formed a temporary alliance with the Soviets and then invaded Poland. And Britain and France really knew that the balance of power was going to shift now, and had no choice but to declare war on Germany. Now, what also tends to be forgotten is the Britain and French army at that time wasn't that, at least on paper, that bad. It was certainly stronger militarily than the German. The Germans were also occupied in the Eastern Front. And Britain and French leadership was absolutely appalling. They could have invaded Germany when there was minimal German defences in the West, but they were simply crippled by inertia and poor leadership. And Hitler then, once he knocked Poland out of the war in about 6 weeks, launched a blitzkrieg, and was able to effectively defeat the French within a week. So that's part one of the causes of World War II. Okay, thank you.